Today I'm going to be talking about, again, about the 5500 plus system, an application looking at PPCPs and pesticides in water sample. And working in the Concord lab, in the Toronto lab, sometimes you get the rare opportunity to take a peek behind the curtain and see what's coming. So in the last little while, I got to bother Ian, and Ian got to bother me, and we got to get into the development lab and do some testing on the system before it got released, and it was really exciting to do. So I did this work in conjunction with Casey Highland. She's our global technical marketing food environmental person. So also thanks to her for working through this data set. So for this talk today, I'm basically going to be covering 4 main points. So kind of keep these in mind as we go through the talk, and we'll kind of revisit these at the end. So first, the 5500 plus system will allow you to minimize sample prep. What we're going to be doing in this analysis is leveraging instrument sensitivity, robustness, and linear dynamic range even to do a large volume injection analysis instead of having to prepare your samples, do any SPE and that type of thing. Rather, we'll just analyze them straight. We're going to look at quantitative method performance of this system and of this method. How we're getting precise and accurate results with this large volume injection, even with large panels, even with short run times, even with a wide range of concentrations. We're going to look at confidence beyond ion ratio, beyond MRM workflow, so I will show some MRM data, but I'm going to show how we can leverage the QTrap in a screening type of way, but also be quantitative at the same time, and have the added confidence of full product ion spectrum for qualification. And finally, talk a little bit about software. When you're analyzing these large data sets, or you're using something like full product ion spectrum, it can be a lot to handle, but if we have elegant and efficient software, we can really power through the results and get what you need in a really short amount of time. So I'm going to talk about specifically drinking water analysis and surface water analysis, and looking at the quantitative monitoring of some of the emerging contaminants. So PPCPs and pesticides, they're going to be they're relevant, and they will be continually relevant. Industry continues to make more pesticides, and there are further applications. There'll be discovery of new ones, and pharmaceuticals are not going to go away, and they will enter the water stream at one point or another. And you can have contamination not only from point sources and runoff, but from the incomplete treatment of wastewater. So it's really important to monitor a full suite of these compounds. And they represent a really complex set of chemistries and chemical physical properties. So, I mean, each pharmaceutical, each pesticide has a given structure and a given chemical property for a given platform. That makes it difficult to analyze together, especially if you're trying to incorporate sample prep. You have a range of polarities, partitioning properties, acidities, basicities, pKa's, molecular weights. It's a whole big whack of compounds. And trying to develop an SPE method for a suite of compounds with varying polarities and properties is all but impossible. And what's really important is that accurate and precise quantitation is really important to make decisions moving forward. If you monitor a compound and you can detect it, it's one thing. But if you can't monitor how that concentration is changing or how it's compared historically, you can't make a decision in a regulatory environment moving forward on how you're going to monitor, or how you're going to monitor that compound, or how you're going to monitor the industry. And these compounds are at generally very low concentrations in the environment. It's very difficult to determine chronic low exposure effects, but the first step is actually determining what the chronic low exposure is. So how should you prepare and concentrate a wide variety of compounds that are at really low levels in the environment that are important to detect and quantitate? Don't. Just analyze it. That's the best way, period, if possible. For water samples, SPE is the go-to method, especially when you're looking at hydrophobic type molecules. You can concentrate out of a water matrix to exploit either acidic or basic properties using weak ion, weak cation exchange cartridges, or using these mixed mode, reversed phase cleanup techniques and concentration techniques. Unfortunately, they're time-consuming, they're costly, and there's definitely intersample variability. You're going to get relatively different extraction efficiencies for 197 different pesticides and personal care products. They're all not going to be retained on the same cartridge all of the time. These large volume direct injection workflows are becoming increasingly more common. And again, especially from these aqueous matrices, because you can focus a large volume on a reverse phase column at low aqueous load or high aqueous loading. And what we can do is leverage the ever-growing instrument sensitivity and robustness, and that's really key here to increase the throughput and minimize sample handling errors. The CVs that you see in an assay are primarily driven by sample prep, not by instrument detection anymore. So if we can minimize or eliminate sample prep, you get more precise results. So we're going to enter the SCIEX triple quad 5500 plus system that is QTrap ready. Thank you, Ian, for giving a great overview, so I can power through this a little more quickly. So the analysis of PPCs, I thought somebody was laughing at a very cruel joke I made out there, but that's not somebody in here. What's so funny about it? Analysis of PPCs and pesticides and water requires a few things. Sensitivity for trace level detection in dilute aquatic systems, the selectivity to have confidence in complex matrices, the linear dynamic range to handle potential wide range of environmental concentrations, the speed to handle many compounds at the same time to have short chromatography and high throughput, and robustness to handle many samples without data quality degradation. And one of the things definitely is not just your data quality. To get that back, your instrument's going to have to go down, and nobody wants that. And finally, accuracy and precision to underscore those scientific decisions being made. So we have the sensitivity. It's the same sensitivity you expect from a 5500 plus system. I mean, sensitivities are starting to really reach a plateau. We're reaching a critical limit in terms of how much we can detect, and the 5500 plus still gets us really, really low. Selectivity. We're using MRM workflows. The confidence we have in MRMs, regulatory and bodies know that MRMs are highly selective, but we also have added QTrap functionality to push that even further. Do things like product ion scanning or MRM cubed to get further confidence. Linear dynamic range, we've increased that by an order of magnitude with the new detector technology that we pulled from the 6500 plus. Speed, adding 90 milliseconds of dwell time by going from a 50 millisecond settling time down to 5 is huge, not only for making your chromatography more dense, adding more transitions, but getting higher dwell times to get better quantitative performance at low ion loading, getting better ion statistics with very few ions. Robustness, put a better QJet on it. It's the industry standard for robustness, period. There's nothing like it on the market, and the QJet, for as unglorious as it looks, is my favorite part on the instrument. It's basically why SCIEX can be SCIEX and push the limits, is because we can also be robust, and that comes from the QJet. And finally, accuracy and precision. It's the same industry-leading quantitative performance that you would expect from SCIEX. Nothing has changed from that standpoint. So let's pop into the method. What do we do? The samples, there are a bunch of surface waters, unfiltered water, some drinking water, tap water, some of the stuff that I grabbed from home that I ran through my filter in the fridge just to make sure it was working. Fast flash forward, yes, it does work. That was good. And so collected that from all around Ontario. Stored them in polypropylene containers, stored them in the fridge, and we used the in-house process Milky Water system, and we treated those as blanks for comparison. Sample prep. Does transferring it into a vial count? That's, other than adding an internal standard, that's all I did. Transfer. It was really easy. I like those type of analysis. One of the reasons I wanted to become an applications chemist, because I was tired of doing sample prep, and every time I have to do it, I get upset. This wasn't so bad. In terms of the acquisition details, I use an Exian LCAD system. 100 microliter injection. Just had to swap out the loop on LC system. I did the chromatography on a Phenomenex C18 Luna Omega polar column. This is my new go-to for every single analysis that I'm trying. Anytime I'm doing any multi-residue methods, the C18 polar is the first column I reach for. I love it. 500 microliter flow rate, pretty traditional mobile phases, pretty traditional gas settings and ion spray voltages. And you can see relatively short chromatography, 10 minutes injection to injection. And we used a cycle time of 0.4 seconds because the peak widths were fairly narrow. And because those peak widths are fairly narrow, we could able to even use our scheduled MRM feature to tighten up the window and really increase dwell times in dense chromatography as well. This was the analyte panel that we were looking at. It was 131, combination of 131 PPCPs and pesticides, both positive mode and negative mode. Most heavily, if you're familiar with these analyte panels, most of the compounds are in positive mode, unlike Jean-Roux's method where I've never seen anything like that where half your compounds are in negative mode, but that was really interesting. There'll be application notes coming out for both of these very soon, and we check that one out as well. Jean-Roux's in the back. You can talk to her about that one as well. But yeah, wide range of chemical classes, and this is kind of what the chromatography looks like. So basically, you have everything eluting in about 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and so you can take a look at what the concurrency looks like. So the graph on the left here, you can look at the number of concurrent MRMs happening at the same time. So kind of right in the middle, you're getting at about 80 MRMs happening at the same time in both positive and negative polarity. So you're switching that 0.4 seconds 80 times. So if you're attributing 100 milliseconds to just polarity switching, as with the old systems, that's a lot of dwell time just taken up by polarity switching. You can see how the calculated dwell times drop. But with the 5 millisecond dwell time, you have the ability to do this where you have so many concurrent MRMs. In terms of method performance, let's pull back that chromatography. First, we take a look at the speed of the analysis. We have tons of MRMs concurrently. You still have enough dwell time to have sufficient data point coverage to get quantitative peaks all the way across its chromatography. This is atenolol, which is our earliest eluter, things that are eluting around 5 minutes, high sensitivity, low sensitivity compounds. You're still getting enough points across your peak to get quantitative chromatography and reproducibility, even with the number of compounds that you're looking at the same time. So speed, we're good to go with the system. Sensitivity and reproducibility. On the left here is just a wide range of compounds that have varied sensitivities in electrospray. And you can see how injection to injection, you have great CVs even at the LOQ. So looking at, for this analysis, because you're doing a 100 microliter injection, you're looking at LOQs in the range of low parts per trillion or sub parts per trillion. You're looking at picograms and sub picograms and femtograms on column. So really highly sensitive analysis. And you can see, you're getting CVs in and around 20% at your LOQ. That's generally how we'll define it. And not necessarily by signal to noise, but quantitative performance at the limit of quantification, not just because you can see a peak with a signal to noise of 10. But if you go at 10 times that LOQ, you're getting CVs under 10%, a lot of them under 5%. So again, short dwell times, really fast polarity switching, but still getting excellent quantitative performance. Apparently I can't go back, so we'll keep going. Linear dynamic range, Ian talked a lot about this already, but what I want to point out is we did this linear dynamic range study. In this case, we did it without an internal standard. And what we're finding is the detector isn't the first thing to saturate anymore. At this point, you're limited by electrospray physics in terms of the linear dynamic range you're seeing at the top. So we're seeing about 5 orders of magnitude of linear dynamic range without an internal standard. If we added an internal standard, it would take care of the little bit of saturation we were seeing up at the top end. I didn't show the peaks up, actually I did show the peaks here at the top. This is erythromycin. Up at the top, this is the peak here. You don't see any the cupping at the top or anything like that. The peak height is at the low e to the 7s. These detectors saturate in the mid e to the 8s now. So if I had an internal standard, I could easily go an order of magnitude higher in terms of my linear dynamic range. So 5 orders basically without an internal standard can easily be pushed with an internal standard. So what this means is that you can reduce the amount of time diluting or even concentrating your samples, because maybe you can run something that's a little bit more concentrated. But basically you can get accurate quantitative data the first time you inject your sample, not after redilution, repreparation, and doing it again. And what you can see is the peak shape is nicely conserved, right down from 200 counts to 2 million counts. So highly dense data set, that could be really difficult and time-consuming process. If you're in contract labs and you're running lots of samples, okay, yeah, building the method takes a lot of time, but once a method is built, it runs. Data processing is a pain. So enter SaxOS. This is the way of the future for SCIEX in terms of data acquisition and all of our sample processing. So currently for our X500 systems, our QTrap systems, it replaces Analyst for data acquisition. But now SaxOS can process any of our instrument data. Doesn't matter if it was acquired on the X500 or anything else. Even before SaxOS was updated to the next version that's coming out soon, I was able to process the 5500 plus data. So that was really nice. And what's really nice is it is the combination of multi-quant, which is our quantitative software that's really efficient for cranking through samples, but it also gives you master view functionality for library searching and kind of qualitative data review. So some of the new features that have been incorporated that you will not see in multi-quant specifically is this thing called automatic outlier removal. So when you're looking at 131 different compounds that are going to have a range of sensitivities, that are going to be in various ranges of concentrations in your samples that you expect, their linear dynamic ranges are going to be all over the place. So having one calibration curve for every compound is very difficult. But having to go through and remove all the outliers from 131 different samples, especially at the low end where not very sensitive compounds aren't seen in those low standards, or really sensitive compounds that are saturating at the high end, that takes a lot of time. But you can have rapid, unbiased, which is key, unbiased management of all of your compounds in terms of their calibration data. Now, this isn't just a checkbox, I promise you. It's not software that you don't know how it works. You dictate how this works. So there are certain regulatory environments that you can remove the data points at the low end and the high end of the curve, but you can't remove an interior point. And you can tell the software from something like maximum total number of outliers outside of that upper and lower end, I want to say remove 0 points. If an interior point fails, that whole calibration curve fails. You can tell it how it handles replicates. If you set a maximum 1 replicate outlier, if you ran a triplicate sample or triplicate curve. If 1 outlier fails, okay, that's okay at that calibration level. But if 2 outliers fail at that calibration level, all three of those fail. So you have really, really precise ways to dictate how you can automatically remove points from these calibration curves, and this works really, really nicely. So you can see down at this low end, these samples really didn't differ any from our blank samples, and so you had really poor quantitative performance down at a couple thousand counts. The software recognized that the R-squared deviated. If you included those points, they were eliminated, and you can see linearity all the way through. And this is completely unmonitored once you set it up in your system. Yeah, so we remove those points automatically, and it will work for every single compound in your sample. Finally, this is really exciting. This is in the latest iteration of SaxOS 1.5, is this custom flagging and custom calculations. And so some of the feedback that we heard of moving away from multi-quant, if you're familiar with multi-quant, and into processing in SaxOS is, I don't have queries anymore. Does anybody use queries in multi-quant here? No? Okay, so basically a query is a way to add additional calculations, or you basically add Excel functionality to bring back any data and to do calculations on your data set after it gets processed and spit that out into a report. So built into SaxOS now is this custom calculation feature. And the main example that we use here is for something like calculating your internal standard recovery. You can do this right inside of the software. So if you want to calculate your internal standard recovery, you want to take the area of your internal standard in your sample, and you want to divide it by the average of the internal standards from your standards. So this is easy to do. It's a click button. The syntax is really easy to understand. If you can use Excel, you can use this. So here all I did was I took the internal standard area divided by the mean internal standard area, and I took the mean only from the standards, and I can multiply that by 100%. So right in the software, I'm going to get a column that says internal standard recovery, and I can see that right in there. So I know if I see a sample, if it's below 80% recovery, I know I need to flag that sample. And you can also do that right inside the software. There is custom flagging for every single column, as well as the columns you just made in custom calculations. So now I can say, I want to take a range on that IS recovery. I know my IS recovery needs to be between 80 and 120%. Now I can create a flag if it's outside of that. And you can easily filter the data to show everything that fails or everything that passes that flag. So what you can do inside of your software is set up a series of flags inside of the columns. You can apply those flags, save them as a column set. So when you do your data review, you pull up your column set. Every single column can be filtered. Now I'm reviewing 43 columns or 43 rows of data instead of 640 rows of data. Bring up your peak review. You see everything right underneath. You can show your ion ratio confidence line. So in this case, I looked at signal noise greater than 10, ion ratio within 20%, and that's this visual check marks using this traffic light control. I looked at retention time within 1%. I only wanted to see the quantifier ions because in my overlay, I can show the qualifiers with the ion ratio lines to check confidence, and I know the confidence is good. And then I only wanted to show the unknown samples. So this is an easy way to quickly review lots of data for lots of samples. And again, I don't have to review my calibration. It's not as critical to go back and review every single calibration curve because it reviews automatic outlier removal. And like I said, not only are the column layouts saved, but you can also save a filter set. So the filters that you're going to use for calibration curve review are things like, I want to see ion ratios that are failing. I want to see accuracy that's out on my calibration curves. But when I'm looking at unknowns, I want to see ion ratios that are passing. I want to see precision data. So you can save a column set for calibration curve review. Filters get applied, columns come in, review your data quickly, and now I want to review my unknowns, bring in that column set. It's really quick to switch back and forth between reviewing your data, whether it's QC review or unknown review. So just a quick little sample summary. I bring up three compounds that were a hit in basically every sample. So these C designations were surface water samples, and then some examples of some of the drinking water and tap water and that kind of things that I pulled from a few different sources. We did N equals 14 replicates, so we injected these many times just to get some precision data. We did this basically straight over 3 days of analysis. For these compounds in particular, you're seeing less than 10% CV over the weekend. The only ones that really were seeing higher CVs were compounds that are unstable when you combine them in the standards. I mixed a whole bunch of standards together, and as you may well know, is when you put a whole big mix together, sometimes the chemistries aren't compatible. But one particular surface water contained 14 analytes. You can probably guess by the bar graph which sample that was. It contained a few pesticides, a few pharmaceuticals, some other, every sample contains caffeine. You'll never get away from that. At one system I had to swap out because it looked like somebody spilled a coffee on it with the amount of caffeine that was coming out of that LC system. But yeah, you saw compounds that were in sub-nanogram per liter all the way up to hundreds of nanogram per liter. Yeah, so the drinking water sources, as you can see here, which was nice to see, had concentrations significantly lower than the surface waters. And I took a sample, kind of a pre-filter pre-water filter and post-water filter, and for anything that I did detect, it did get removed. So the water filter in my fridge does work, which is nice. So what about the QTrap? What's really nice about the QTrap is you can use IDA workflows to trigger enhanced product ion spectrum. So here I have a kind of a dummy method set up. So I have an MRM method that, same MRM method I could have. You can have a scheduled MRM method. You pull, just like I showed from previous slides. Then you can set some IDA criteria. So at any given cycle, it's going to look for the top 1 or 2 or however many you want to do, depending on what your cycle time requirements are. So pick the top couple ions that have an intensity greater than your threshold, and you can send them to the QTrap for a full product ion spectrum. So you still get your MRM data, but then you can also get a full product ion spectrum. And what's really nice, with the speed of the QTrap, you get this on the chromatographic timescale. You don't have to extend your runs. You don't have to widen anything. With the IDA logic, you can still do this on the chromatographic timescale. So you're still having cycle times in the order of 0.4, 0.5, 1 second cycle times. So the way I did this was I monitored a single transition instead of 2 transitions for each analyte, and then used the EPI scan as a qualifier instead of just looking at an ion ratio. And I used a collision energy of 35 with a spread of 15 to make a richer fragmentation pattern. 1, that's why we use that, but 2, that's the way pretty much all SciEX libraries are acquired, so we can get really nice library matches for that. So when you're reviewing your data, instead of looking at ion ratios, you're looking at a peak, and you're looking at a spectrum and a library match. So what you can see here is these open circles are every time the IDA was triggered for that given analyte, and the filled circle is the product ion spectrum that it was using to do the library search. So you're gaining some added specificity because not only are you comparing ion ratios between 2 things in MRM, you're looking at a library spectrum which is N ion ratios, depending on how that compound fragments and characteristically fragments. So again, with this filtering, you can filter on a library confidence. So I wanted to see good to okay library confidence in terms of what I was getting. So that's somewhere from a library score from 50 to 70 is an okay library score. And with our algorithm, anything above 70, we have high confidence that is a match. And so you can see I looked just for carbamazepine, and across all these samples, when the concentration was a little bit lower, we got kind of okay library hits, but anytime the concentration was above our LLQ, we were basically getting a good library hit. And this can be done alongside your quant. You run your calibration standards along with the sample set, and you pull in a calculated concentration column right alongside this. This doesn't have to be done independently of your quant. And again, additional filters can also be applied just to review your data. You're no longer reviewing ion ratios, you're looking at library hits and library scores. So what does this look like? Deitz, again, you find in pretty much every surface water sample. It's everywhere. Really nice fragmentation on this type of compound, and we have no problem seeing this. Sulfamethoxazole, really nice library matches, and all these library scores are above 80, which is really high confidence, especially without accurate mass. This is a nominal mass system. We're still getting really nice library scores. So to conclude, the SciEX triple quad system offers the incredible flexibility for this type of sample analysis. You have the 5 millisecond polarity switching for denser chromatography and higher throughput. Have the robustness of a dual stage QJet now. Sensitivity to minimize any sample prep if at all possible. The linear dynamic range to run your sample once and only once. Selectivity of library matching with QTrap EPI spectrum to improve your confidence. And then you get a high degree of accuracy and precision even at those low ion counts. And that's really where SciEX is really strong in terms of their quantitation, is at those low ion counts where it counts. So with that, I will take any questions and again say thank you for being here this early in the morning.